Tonight on Bridge City News. Today is the day the provincial carbon tax was eliminated in Alberta, but when will the federal one kick in? The raging wildfires in northern Alberta have caused more evacuations and air quality alerts. And a team of Lethbridge women is headed to Toronto for an international competition. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta legislature was expected to pass a bill today killing the provincial carbon tax. Premier Jason Kenney promised during last month's election campaign that he would get rid of the tax on gas and fossil fuel heating. The former NDP government brought in the tax on greenhouse gas emissions with proceeds to pay for green projects. The tax Albertans pay an extra 7 cents a litre at the pumps and $1.51 more per gigajoule of natural gas. Premier Kenney says eliminating the provincial carbon tax would put $1.4 billion back into Albertans' pockets. Alberta will now become the subject to federal carbon levy, but Kenney said, like other provinces, he will fight that in court. Hot, dry conditions and gusty winds have led to what fire watchers call a red flag warning across our province's boreal forest. The Chuckegg Creek fire, located about 3 kilometers southwest of high level, has now grown to over 150,000 hectares. It has increased 200 square kilometers since Tuesday. About 5,000 people in the town and others from Steen River have been forced from their homes by the flames. Mandatory evacuations have also been ordered for the hamlet of Wabasca, Fort Chipewyan, and the Big Stone Cree Nation in the Slave Lake Forest area. Smoke from the wildfires has prompted Environment Canada to issue a special air quality statement for the city of Edmonton. Smoky haze blanketed much of southern Alberta this morning as wildfires in northern Alberta continue to grow. The air quality in Lethbridge scored a 3 or low risk on the air quality index, but is expected to climb to a moderate risk later this evening. Dr. Lizette Elimure with the Alberta Health Services says that those who wear air filter masks are getting little to no benefit from them at all.
When you are exposed to heavy smoke or even moderate smoke or high risk air quality or even just moderate, a mask will not provide any protection to your lungs as far as air quality. We use masks for other reasons like infectious diseases, but it does not help with air quality problems. At the very least, going into your car and putting on the air circulation inside the car does give you a little bit of protection, but it's not your ideal. A car is supposed to be used from going from here to there. It's not supposed to give you a break from the poor air.
Police have charged a 42-year-old Lethbridge man with sexual assault. Authorities say Manish Kumar Kokar assaulted a 23-year-old female employee in the basement of a show home. Police say the victim did not know her attacker prior to the incident, which occurred yesterday. Kokar was released from custody and is prohibited from attending any of the homes for sale by the company she works for. He is scheduled to appear in court on July 16th. Lethbridge police have charged a male and female with property and drug offenses after a foot chase downtown led police to a bike chop shop.
Several items were located inside that apartment that the police believed to be stolen, and we were granted a search warrant. Went in later on in the evening with the lawful authority and located several bike frames, bike parts, forks, including 2 whole bikes that had yet to be chopped up. As a result of that investigation, John Whipf and Jade Little have been charged with several property offenses, including theft over and under $5,000. There's also many items inside the apartment that were linked to theft from motor vehicles, cell phones, wallets, purses, that kind of stuff.
Viff was released from custody by Justice of the Peace and is scheduled to appear in court June 12th. Little is currently in custody awaiting bail. To help alleviate some of the traffic congestion on the west end of the city, Lethbridge has implemented some changes to 2 major road construction projects. Temporary lanes will be opened at McMaster Boulevard West, McLeod Drive West, and Mount Burke Boulevard West by the end of next week. The new lanes will allow for better flow north and south on McMaster and to reduce congestion on University Drive. The City of Lethbridge received many complaints from those who live in the West End and how those major construction projects have added up to an extra hour of driving time to get to and from home. Since the first community conversation was such a success, Lethbridge decided to host a second open house yesterday at CASA. 18 city projects were on display for residents to walk through and to receive more information. There were a few new projects in particular that people were excited to see.
The 5th Avenue North and 13th Street project, which is just starting, a lot of people are coming out for that. We're in the final draft stages of the cyclone corridor plan, and so a lot of people are interested in that. And Crossings is getting a new playground, and those are always the popular ones to come and see.
The next community engagement event will take place in October. A former utility executive discussed the environmental impact of wind and farms today. Bobby Lambright spoke at SACPA about the need for government intervention. She also talked about the importance of maintaining the biodiversity of Pincher Creek concerning wind-related projects.
Generally, when people think about renewables, particularly, people who are concerned about the environment, concerned about climate change, they see renewables as a positive solution. And it can be in the right circumstance and the right location. The concern that I'm raising and that I hope will create greater awareness for people across Alberta is that when renewable is actually in conflict, with another really critical environmental benefit that we have in this province, then that should be something that we take notice of and address before it's too late.
Lambright has conducted research into the Alberta Renewable Energy Program, the status of wind generation, and associated transmission developments as they relate to southwestern Alberta. A team of Lethbridge women will be headed to an international competition in Toronto this week to test their knowledge on blockchain technology and artificial intelligence. The Crypto Chicks Hackathon runs May 31st to June 2nd and features competitors from around the world in person and online. The team leaves for the competition tomorrow. While the achievements of over 1,300 graduates are being celebrated this week, another major milestone is being welcomed at the University of Lethbridge. Charles Weaselhead was installed as the university's 14th Chancellor. At a recent pipe ceremony held in his honor, Weaselhead says this is a monumental step for the university and for First Nations people.
I've always taken a special interest in education, not only for individuals, but also for our First Nation education systems. I think it's so significant that education is very, very important to advance, our students and our First Nation communities as well too.
It is the first time an Indigenous man has been elected Chancellor in the university's 52-year history. The Medicine Hat Tigers of the Western Hockey League have parted ways with their head coach and GM, Sean Clouston. The club announced today that Clouston's tenure with the team after 16 seasons was coming to an end. Clouston joined the Tigers in the 2003-04 season after spending the previous year as head coach of the Tri-City Americans. Clouston took the Tigers to the playoffs in each of his 9 seasons as head coach, making it past the first round 6 times. The Toronto Raptors will make history tonight as they make their NBA Finals debut when they host the Golden State Warriors. Raptors president Masai Ujiri rebuilt the Raps with a lofty goal of making the finals.
This is what we dream of. Every day you come to work, this is it, and it's overwhelming because you think we can all relate to the multicultural or the diversity of Toronto and Canada, and that's how our team is. Being international myself and being from Africa, I'm proud of that. It's been a grind, we get mocked, we get people talk about us in different ways, but for us, that's the growth. That's the thing. Those are the things that we have to go through. But I can tell you, it's gonna be crazy.
Most guys been through. Been to the Eastern Finals on this team, and as each series goes, you get more media or ask more questions about what's going on. But my thing is just, once this is over, it's still between the lines. You're playing 5-on-5, like I just told him. We're still playing basketball. We have a scheme. Just focus on that and don't focus on no outside attention. And we know what we need to do. You're inside this locker room every day, so don't pay attention to people who are not in your locker room.
Yeah, the Toronto Raptors have a chance to do something very special with the entire country on their side heading into the finals tonight. Now, for a hockey town, Lethbridge is pretty excited for tonight's game against the Golden State Warriors. Ainsley O'Reilly hit the streets to get some reaction from fans.
For the first time in franchise history, the Toronto Raptors are in the NBA Finals. I know we're in southern Alberta, which isn't exactly close to Toronto, but this is Canada's team. Today, I'm talking to passionate fans who are ready for Game 1.
Well, anytime that we can have a sporting event that we're not supposed to be very good at and in the final as a city, and it'll set the whole country on its ear.
It's not just Toronto, it's Canada in the finals. It's a whole nation. But the Bay's not going to win. We're going to win. Kawhi's going to stay. We're going to go win a couple more ships.
Go Canada. Simple. We should win. That's a definite must.
Get the brooms up. It's going to be a sweep. Raptors in 4.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence says he and U.S. President Donald Trump believe the relationship between the United States and Canada has never been stronger. Pence was in Ottawa today for a brief visit that will focus on the timeline for ratification of the new North American Free Trade Agreement.
We're very much looking forward to working together to make sure that the benefits of this agreement, which we took a fair bit of time and energy to get right, but it ended up being, as Mike had predicted at a governor's meeting in Rhode Island that I attended, a win-win-win for all three of our countries. And now the ratification process will be another opportunity for us to continue to work together and collaborate for the benefit of our citizens.
President Trump and I believe that the relationship between the United States and Canada has never been stronger, and that is a reflection of his leadership, your leadership, and the bonds that have been forged through the generations by those who served in uniform, shoulder to shoulder. But the principal reason for my meeting today is because we have a historic opportunity to strengthen the economic ties between our two nations with the passage of the USMCA.
Pence also said he was looking forward to chatting with Trudeau about the arrest and detention of the two Canadians in China, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. The new NAFTA and the deal to lift steel tariffs were a hot topic of conversation during question period in Ottawa.
The greatest threat to Canada's trading relationship with the United States is the weakness of this Prime Minister. Any old deal would have been better than the deal that he came home with. Concession after concession after concession on dairy, on autos, on pharmaceuticals. And now, in order to get steel tariffs lifted, Mr. Speaker, he had to give away the only piece of leverage that Canada had.
Stephen Harper told everyone, no matter what, just abdicate to the United States. And that's exactly what the Conservatives were recommending we did. We stood strong alongside all Canadians, and we got a good deal for Canadians the way they expected it.
It seems that Alberta has an ally when it comes to our oil. Green Party leader Elizabeth May surprised many people in Ottawa recently when she said provinces should buy Alberta and not foreign oil. Tyler Dawson is the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, and he says the support is nice, but in the end, the Greens want to eliminate oil altogether.
Elizabeth May believed Canada should be off oil by 2050, but she says, so long as we're going to need oil, well, why don't we profit off it? Why don't we use Canadian oil? Which, frankly, I think is a perfectly sensible position, but let's not mistake that for the position of Andrew Scheer or Jason Kenney or even maybe for that matter, Justin Trudeau, that the oil industry is sort of a long-term, valuable economic project in this country.
Catch my full interview with Tyler Dawson from the National Post discussing some of the biggest stories coming out of the legislature in Edmonton, coming up after business news. Wild weather continues to hit many of the southern states. Tornadoes swept through parts of northeastern Texas, damaging homes, buildings, and at least one person was injured. Heavy damage was reported both southwest and east of Dallas.
We've done this twice today already. We're okay because everybody's okay. We had a major tornado outbreak 2 years ago, so we all kind of know what to do. I mean, there were people out in the streets 10 minutes after this with tractors getting debris out of it, so everybody just pitches in and everybody's a big help.
And you have holes in the building here, yet you're still inviting people in to seek shelter right now as there's more storms.
It's thundering and lightning pretty good outside right now, so we're kind of getting full here.
Meanwhile, along the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, thousands of residents have been impacted by widespread flooding along the swollen Arkansas River. The river hit record levels in Arkansas' second largest city of Fort Smith. Officials say an aging levee system was holding up despite a rush of water coming downstream from rain-soaked Oklahoma and Kansas. At least 7 people are dead and more than 20 people are missing after a sightseeing boat carrying South Korean tourists collided with a large cruise ship and sank on the Danube River in Budapest, Hungary last night. Police have launched a criminal investigation into the incident. Officials say the boat, a 70-year-old vessel built in the former Soviet Union, had been on its way back after an hour-long night tour. The tour party had consisted of 30 tourists, 2 guides, and a photographer. A beautiful summer-like day today. Make sure you have lots of sunscreen the rest of the week and into the weekend. A lot of blue sky and sunshine lie ahead. I'll have a complete look at the weather picture in just a moment. Lots of sunshine and hot today. Tonight, a chance of showers developing with a low near 10. A mixture of sun and cloud tomorrow with a high near 25. Sunny and a balmy 28 for Saturday. Sunday even warmer as we're expecting a high of 29. Monday clear and 27. Tuesday cooling off slightly to 24 degrees. Wednesday lots of sunshine again and a high near 25. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 20 and an average low of 7. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1986 at 34 degrees, and the record low was -2 in 1989. Sunrise was at 5:30, sunset at 9:27. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria will be mainly sunny at 23, just a few clouds at 21 in Vancouver. A chance of thunder showers at 23 degrees for Calgary on Friday. Mainly sunny at 25 for Edmonton. Sunshine at 23 is on tap for Regina tomorrow. Expect a high near 22 for Saskatoon. Sunshine at 18 degrees for Winnipeg. In Toronto, it'll be mainly sunny at 20, just 1 degree cooler in Ottawa. Montreal will also be sunny and 19 degrees. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have showers at 19. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have drizzle at 13. Charlottetown, PEI will have rain at 15. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, it should be overcast and 8 degrees tomorrow. The UCP government has introduced a bill to slash what it calls unnecessary regulations hindering economic growth. Premier Jason Kenney says the Red Tape Reduction Act will help businesses prosper. He says the goal is to reduce regulations by 1/3 over 4 years. The NDP say the legislation should contain safeguards to ensure public welfare is not sacrificed while growing the economy. It notes the bill does not even define what red tape really is. The federal government has announced a new rebate plan to help businesses and provinces with a national carbon tax. The program will cost $1.4 billion over 4 years and will help those businesses reduce their energy use, which will then cut their carbon tax bills. Small and medium businesses will receive a rebate of up to half the cost of buying more energy-efficient equipment. The maximum amount is $20,000. A separate program will allow businesses to apply to get rebates for retrofits that will make businesses use less energy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in Ottawa today. The two were discussing the ratification of the new trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The two chatted before they met with the Canadian Council for the USMCA agreement. The Bank of Canada is signaling that it will not be cutting interest rates in the near future. Many economists and investors were betting that it would. The Bank of Canada held its benchmark rate steady at 1.75% yesterday, but struck an optimistic tone as it pointed to accumulating evidence of an economic recovery. The bank cited a more stable national housing market, more consumer spending, employment gains, and a recovery in the oil sector as factors that the recent slowdown was just temporary. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, The Alberta legislature was expected to pass a bill today killing the provincial carbon tax. Premier Jason Kenney promised during last month's election campaign that he would get rid of the tax on gas and fossil-fueled heating. The former NDP government brought in the tax on greenhouse gas emissions with proceeds to pay for green projects. Alberta, however, will become the subject of the new federal carbon levy, but Kenney said, like other provinces, he will fight that in court. The UCP says the minimum wage rollback for our youth will allow more employers to hire young people, and the NDP says that $15 to $13 an hour is just picking the pockets of young people. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Enjoy a cultural experience and take a taste of Bhutan, taking place Friday, May 31st at the Multicultural Centre in Lethbridge. This event is presented by the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association and the Canadian Bhutanese Society. Dinner is served at 6:30 p.m. followed by music and a dance performance. Cost is $20 for adults, $12 per child, and tickets must be purchased in advance. Tickets are available at the Southern Alberta Ethnic Association office or go online to saea.ca. The annual Hike for Life organized by the Lethbridge and District Pro-Life Association is taking place Saturday, June 1st from 9 a.m. to noon at the Henderson Lake Park Kiwanis Picnic Shelter. Funds raised will go to support the pro-life message and to Elsie's House, the new maternity home for pregnant women in need of a safe place to call home. For more information, visit lifelethbridge.org. Target Hunger is an annual food drive being held on Saturday, June 8th, and organizers are seeking volunteers to help drop off and collect the yellow bags throughout the city, along with sorting out food at the food banks on event day. Volunteers who want to help with drop-off and collection will need to have access to a vehicle. To sign up, visit targethungerlethbridge.com or call the Lethbridge Food Bank at 403-320-1879 or the Interfaith Food Bank at 403-320-8779. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Some big news out of the legislature this week was the end of the working group on conversion therapy. To talk more about it and other big stories from Edmonton is the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins me now from our provincial capital. Tyler, there was some controversy at the Ledge that the UCP was actually behind the cancellation.
Yeah, it was a little bit complicated. I mean, it was sort of first reported as the United Conservatives had scrapped this working group. And then there's sort of a little bit of back and forth between reporters and the government. And the idea seems to be now that the working group might have just sort of died when the Conservatives came in. Now, they obviously could have struck it again or kept it with a mandate to continue looking into this. And the health minister said, well, I'm happy to hear from the working group, the committee, when it's all done its work or has something to say. But, you know, it really did, it struck not a sort of a great chord for Jason Kenney's premiership, I think, because so much of the New Democrats' attack on him during the campaign, and frankly, since he came back to Alberta from federal politics, was his history as a pro-life politician, his history as someone who opposed same-sex marriage over the years. And so, you know, maybe this won't have that huge of an impact, the ending of this working group in the end. But, you know, it certainly, I think, for the people that already were suspicious maybe of his motives on some of these issues, it didn't look super great. Now, the defense the government gave, I think, sort of adds to that, because the health minister said, well, you know, conversion therapy doesn't happen in Alberta because it's not allowed to happen. You know, if you're a psychologist that did it, you would get kicked out of the college. You know, this is not an approved treatment and things like that, which, be that as it may, something doesn't need to be called conversion therapy to be sort of doing that. So, you know, it came off as just a little bit wishy-washy, a little bit sneaky for a government that, you know, I'm not sure what the purpose of that was. I mean, you're alienating, maybe not the UCP base, but you are certainly, you know, reinvigorating opponents. You're giving ammunition to the New Democrats and their supporters for fundraising and all those sorts of things. So as beyond maybe the ethical issue of whether or not this was the right thing to do, I think it also was maybe a little bit of a political misstep for them, because it's just the sort of thing that I think risks causing more trouble than it was worth for them.
Now, another big story making the rounds is the youth wage rollback for those aged 13 to 17, minimum wage potentially going from 15 to 13 bucks an hour. The UCP says it would allow employers to hire more young people, but the NDP say, no, you're picking the kids' pockets.
Yeah, it was funny. I was sort of reading up on that, and I'm remembering back to my very first job I was a stock boy at Zellers, and I think I made $7.05 an hour, and this was only in, goodness, would have been 2005 maybe. So the minimum wage is doubled in 15 years. Yeah, that is the argument, and that's the argument sort of more generally against minimum wage increases, is that it ends up pricing people out of the market. If you're a small business owner with a few employees, that those few bucks might be make or break for your bottom line over the course of a year. Now, the NDP did sort of considerably raise the minimum wage overall over the course of their tenure. It was about $10.20, I think, when they first took power, and by the time they left, it was about 15. So, and this rollback is only, as you said, for workers 13 to 17. And the idea is that if it's cheaper to hire a young person, then employers are going to hire more young people. Maybe they'll get more seasonal work, all those sorts of things. And it speaks to the value of that very first job. I mean, if you don't get that first job when you're 15 or whatever, where do you go from there? You once you finish high school, or if you're working for a summer before you go to university, or maybe you're jumping right into the workforce, it's good to have those references built up. So the UCP says there's an awful lot of young people in the province who are out of work and, just not even looking for work right now because they just can't find anything. So I think there's maybe a larger economic dimension to this sort of wrapped in, that, nobody's having a particularly easy time finding work. And maybe for young people, this wage decrease will help them. Now, were I 17 again or 16, I would be beside myself, I think, especially if I'd just got a job and was, preparing for a summer of full-time work and had budgeted, and maybe I was going to university and was planning on setting some money aside for textbooks and whatever. And those $2 an hour, just as they save money for a business, well, that certainly adds up to what you might call a wage loss for these young people. So again, you have a whole group of people who might be kind of ticked off who are going to be voters the next time around. So is this the sort of thing that, carries over? Is this the sort of thing that people will be willing to forgive because they're happy to have a job? Certainly that remains to be seen. But, I remember being that age, and I think I would be really ticked off if I was a teenager right now.
I hate to tell you how much I was making with my first job at an old shoe store many, many years ago in the 80s, but I won't go there. Premier Jason Kenney was in Ontario recently promoting his Alberta is open for business message. Do you think the trip will really pay off, or should he have just stayed home?
Well, this is a theme, I think, in Jason Kenney's premiership and his United Conservative leadership. He's working really, really hard to build what he's sort of calling this conservative coalition across the country. We saw it really most clearly, I think, on the carbon tax over the summer when, he was meeting with Scott Moe. He talked to Brad Wall when he was premier about these sorts of things. Doug Ford came out to Calgary for a big carbon tax rally. So what I think the long game is, what he would probably say the long game is on this, is that Albertans have elected a Conservative premier to stand up for their interests. And Jason Kenney believes that part of that mandate is to campaign against the federal Liberals in many ways. So him going to Ontario, meeting with Premier Doug Ford, this is sort of part of broadening this Conservative coalition, speaking to Conservative voters in Ontario, because when the election comes, the federal election in the fall, I mean, those elections are not won on Alberta votes. Those elections are not won or lost on, frankly, Western Canadian votes. Those elections are won and lost in Quebec and Ontario. And nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, very few Albertans in the scheme of things are going to be voting Liberal come October anyways. So if the Conservatives, I think, are going to make up ground, they're going to want to do it in Ontario. And Jason Kenney, believing that it's part of his role to campaign for Conservative government, he is probably very useful to Andrew Scheer in those communities. I mean, he's well known around the GTA from his work as a federal minister. So, there's the open for business side of things that is red tape reductions and Trans Mountain campaigns and all these sorts of things that are happening. But there's also this other side of it, which is the long political game, and that is making Andrew Scheer the next Prime Minister.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Trans Mountain, Tyler. Sonia Savage, Alberta's new energy minister, was also in Ontario, traveled to Ottawa to announce a new ad campaign in support of the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. The province will roll out $1.65 million for the multimedia campaign called Yes to TMX. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it basically trucks driving around with billboards saying, TMX is good and it benefits the Canadian economy. Now, this is sort of similar to an approach that the New Democrats had tried back last year. They took out full-page ads in newspapers and stuff. So this is, it's the UCP's new TMX push. The idea behind it, namely that we need to sort of win people over to the idea of building TMX, is not an especially new one. It's sort of interesting. It's, Kenny spends a lot of time criticizing the Notley government's attempt to get social license through a carbon tax. Well, they are in essence, I think, trying to build and buy social license through an ad campaign. Will it work? I don't know, but it certainly can't hurt to keep it on everyone's radar. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the benefit of this to the Alberta economy, but I genuinely don't know if the rest of Canada knows how important the oil industry is to our sort of national gross domestic product and the national economy. I mean, I think, people in the Maritimes, I think, know that because so many Maritimers have come out here to work. But you do need, I think, to sell that message a little bit in Ontario. Will this ad campaign work, or does Jason Kenney's stumping in Ontario do more? Hard to say, I think, but he is taking the fight to the federal government, certainly, and he promised to do that. So in that sense, it's certainly a fulfillment of campaign promises.
Green Party leader Elizabeth May turned a few heads this week when she said Canadians should stop importing foreign oil and instead rely on Canadian oil, Alberta oil. So Albertans probably thinking, hey, good job, Elizabeth May.
Yeah, it's sort of like the ends of the spectrum are bending together a little bit here. I mean, the idea that we should get off foreign oil and use mainly Alberta oil is a similar position to what Andrew Scheer says. So it was, I think, a lot of people's ears sort of tweaked at that and eyebrows went up, wondering what was going on. But of course, this is part of the Green Party's long game. So Elizabeth May believed Canada should be off oil by 2050. But she says, so long as we're going to need oil, well, why don't we profit off it? Why don't we use Canadian oil? Which, frankly, I think is a perfectly sensible position. But let's not mistake that for the position of Andrew Scheer or Jason Kenney, or even maybe for that matter, Justin Trudeau, that the oil industry is sort of a long-term, valuable economic project in this country. And speaking of Andrew Scheer, his goal is to have Canada mainly off foreign oil by 2030. So it's interesting to see, to some extent, a consensus developing around these issues. I mean, by no means is it a consensus on all parts of it, but there is sort of this narrowing maybe of the political spectrum, at least among sort of relatively mainstream political parties, that this is a benefit to the economy, benefit to the country as a whole, and maybe we should be a little more measured, perhaps, in our approach to it, even if our long game is to, get off oil.
A story we've been following closely on Bridge City News is out of the Control Wildfire, which has now grown to over 130,000 hectares by high level. Around 5,000 people have already been evacuated. Some are set up in shelters in Slave Lake. Tyler, other regions are also preparing to evacuate.
Yeah, there are a handful of other fires. The fires are spreading. I believe Trout Lake is one of the ones that is under an evacuation alert. There's a couple of First Nations as well. And it's funny, shortly after we spoke last week, as a matter of fact, some of the details came out about the assistance program that is available for people who've been evacuated. Now it seems like a very straightforward system. You apply online and money shows up in your account. And basically it's $1,250 per adult, and then another $500 per dependent child. So that's meant to sort of defray some of the costs around, the evacuation itself. If you're up in a hotel, if you're renting a campsite, if you've had to put your dog in daycare, these are sort of the immediate expenses from this evacuation. The government is putting forward some money to help on that. And I would say certainly by now this evacuation has gone on longer than people had anticipated and hoped for. But on high level, the fire still is about 3 kilometers away. It has been growing, but it's maybe blessedly growing in the other direction. Now, there may be other things in the path at some point if it keeps going that way, but the work that was sort of done late last week to clear out a bunch of space around high level so that there was sort of nothing for this fire to burn seems to, for the time being, have held it off. But it's hot, windy weather up there, and these things can change really quickly if the weather doesn't become favorable and if they don't get a whole pile of rain.
Yeah, we got to pray for rain, absolutely, for the good folks in northern Alberta. The opioid crisis continues in many regions across the province, Tyler. In Calgary, police say calls have jumped 50% about the 3-year average in an area surrounded by a supervised drug consumption site in downtown Calgary. Safe consumption and injection sites were a contentious issue heading into last spring's provincial election. Is the UCP looking into dealing with some of the issues the sites present?
They sort of are. Jason Kenney, I think personally, I get the sense, certainly from the way he talks about it, is not an enormous fan of these sites. The platform and on the campaign, basically what he committed to was there needs to be sort of social impact studies done before these sites are set up and consultation with the communities. Now, whether or not that means some could be shut down, that has not, I don't think, been made clear. Now, we perhaps have a sense of what could happen from Ontario, which is that the Ford government did sort of revoke funding for a handful of these sites based on public complaints. So, I think it remains to be seen what happens on that. My suspicion, though, is that no government wants to take sort of a drastic move on these things and then have a whole bunch of people die. Yes, we're talking more police calls, but what is the scale we're talking about, right? I mean, if we're talking about break-ins in cars and things like that, that's obviously not great. Nobody wants that in their neighborhood. But I suspect we are not talking about a huge increase in homicides and assaults and things like that. So I think the government needs to weigh pretty carefully that if they believe these sites are working, which the research on that is relatively good, they're in a risky position, I think, if they start shutting these things down. And then, because a body count, I think, is worse than a great deal of the crime that results from these things. So it's a sticky position, for sure, in many ways. But in a lot of other ways, unfortunately, governments are able, I think, to pick on the most vulnerable citizens in some cases. And there's not a whole ton of sympathy for a lot of drug users out there. So this is the sort of thing a government, I think, could get away with. But I think public health experts would say they need to think quite carefully before they make any drastic steps on this.
We have a safe consumption and injection site here in Lethbridge called Arches, and a lot of the business owners we've chatted with in the area surrounding the safe consumption site are really concerned because their business is plummeted. So economically, that's also a factor as well, because of all of the people that go and use the safe consumption sites. So maybe more studying definitely has to be done. And they said what they should probably do is maybe set it up, the detox beds and maybe the counseling services through the hospital instead of setting up near businesses in the downtown core. So no easy answers, are there?
No, there aren't. It's, in Ottawa for a long time when I was working out there, a group of people just set one up in a tent in a downtown park for a while. That it actually went relatively well, but it was sort of a shocking way to, provide health care, for maybe lack of a better way to put it.
Our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me on.
Canada is one of the best places to live on the planet, but yet we do have some shortcomings and some changes that need to be made, especially in the areas of moral failure. What will it take to change Canada? Joining me now is Faye Grosetsky, a best-selling Canadian author, conference speaker, and the host of the Faye television program, which now airs on the Miracle Channel Wednesdays at 10:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Faye, welcome to Bridge City News.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Now, for those who are not familiar with your program, what is it all about?
Basically, we're speaking to the issues that are shaping the nation. So we're not a breaking news show per se, because we actually have to record our shows about a month and a half in advance, but we're sort of a current events and current issues show. So what we try to do is just really hear God's heart in terms of what are the issues that are going to impact our nation's future. We are laboring to build a better Canada for the future. And then we just try to find fantastic guests from across our nation that can speak to these issues with academic academic credibility with personal insight, and we just try to dig deep. So this week we'll be airing a show, or this upcoming week, we'll be airing a show on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls issue. A couple of weeks ago, we aired a show on the reality that Canada has had legal abortion for 50 years, and about 30 of those years, I think 31 to be exact, no restrictions on abortion. And so we're just trying to have some of these conversations. We're talking about the debt, we're talking about pipelines, we're talking about freedom of conscience issues. We've had John Carpe on the show several times, and so there's never a dull week.
That's funny. Yeah, we've had John Carpe on our show many times as well with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. What kind of feedback are you receiving on your show so far as you're walking down the streets of Burlington, Ontario?
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of gratitude. I think people are really grateful in general. Our viewers are really grateful that there are media outlets like yours as well that are really sinking their teeth into the issues that are impacting Canada. Of course, we all have a heart for Jesus. We all have a heart to know the Word of God more. We all have a heart to see, you know, mission advanced throughout the world. But we have some very real battles right here in our own nation that need to be spotlighted and talked about. So people really appreciate the Canadian content. They appreciate that we're not tiptoeing around the issues, that we're hitting things head on, and that we always try to bring hope. By the time we close out the show, I always try to land it with hope. And that's, you know, asking the question, what can people do to be a part of the change? I don't think it always takes a lot of talent or even spiritual maturity to be able to point out the problems around us. But, you know, we serve a God of solutions as well. And so in every show, we're trying to land it at what we can do practically to combat the various social justice issues, fiscal justice issues that are plaguing our nation, to be a part of the change. Because I truly believe that together we can build a better Canada.
Amen to that. What age groups are tending to watch your program? Are you getting some of the younger generation tuning in?
Well, on social media, yes. On TV, no. On TV, I'm hearing a lot from the older generation and how much they appreciate the content that we're tackling. And then, of course, every show we post on Facebook and on YouTube, and that's where we're connecting with a lot of the younger generation. We actually just launched 2 weeks ago also a breaking news set where we're going to be articulating on things in a more time-sensitive fashion. And so we actually just spun out a clip on the Unplanned issue of the movie coming to Canada or not coming to Canada. And I think within 24 hours, we were up to almost 20,000 hits without a boost because Facebook wouldn't boost it. And so we're really finding that people are connecting with us in the younger generation online.
Yeah, let's talk about the movie Unplanned for just a moment, which shares the real-life story of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood worker who changed her mind about abortion after seeing the ultrasound of an abortion being performed on an unborn baby. It did well in the United States, but Canadian theaters are refusing to play it. Well, except for here in Lethbridge. We've talked to the owner of the movie, Len Benning, who's trying to bring the movie here. But overall, why do you think it's not showing in Canada? Why are Cineplex and Landmark saying, nope, hold it, not interested?
Well, I think the first time they knocked on the doors, they went through all the traditional mechanisms of how you would get a movie like this to the big screen. I think people thought it was a no-brainer because normally when you have an A+ cinema score rating, which Unplanned did in the US, it's basically a guaranteed moneymaker in the eyes of theaters and advertisers, right? And the fact that it got a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, et cetera, more than doubled expectations the opening weekend with 6.4 million USD coming in, 18 million to date. So everybody thought this was just a no-brainer, that of course Mogul was going to pick it up and it was going to be on the screens with Cineplex because all the market analytics were there at a time when Cineplex needs some winners, in terms of their stock rating. So there was some surprise, when they came back negative. It was actually Mogul that shut it down at the beginning. They knocked on a few other doors. PureFlix tried to get it forward as well, and just things were not moving. And as a matter of fact, there was a grassroots organization, NCLN, that launched a petition. You're probably aware of this on Citizen Go. That petition reached, I think it's pushing 210,000 now, but that didn't get the attention of the distributors either, because let's face it, when it comes to this business, money talks. And so it was about a week and a half ago now, maybe 2 weeks ago now, there was a national boycott that was launched. To date, there's over 7,000 people that are signed up for the boycott. And because it's starting to hit Cineplex in the pocket, conversations are now starting to happen. Now, the reason why it's significant that the producers are holding out for a deal with Cineplex is because Cineplex, basically is an effective monopoly in the entertainment industry as it comes to theaters. They own 80% of the theaters. So though it's wonderful that the grassroots and some of the smaller theaters are wanting to pick it up. That's beautiful, wonderful. But the reality is if we really want to see this film be seen nationwide, Cineplex is the way to go. And so nothing's in the bag yet. The boycott's still on, but let's just say, it's starting to look better than it did yesterday.
So, Faye, this really is a freedom of speech issue, isn't it?
When it's perplexing that they would have rejected it right out of the blocks based on the market analytics. Any other show full of violence and immorality and profanity that had the same market income analytics would have been accepted right away. So yes, it is suspicious. A lot of people do think that this is about the issue of abortion. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people are really rising up to push back, to say, hey, okay, this is not okay. Any other movie would have been accepted right away under the same conditions.
It's also a women's issue. I mean, we often hear the call to listen to the voices of Canadian women, but does that only apply to the pro-choice crowd?
Oh, of course not. So, that's what's so powerful about this movie is it's a real life story. It's a real life story of a woman who's had multiple abortions. Abby Johnson had multiple abortions before she became a Planned Parenthood worker. And she has a firsthand experience with the industry. And, I've been in this kind of work for a few decades now. And I was really struck when I saw the screening in Edmonton at how real and authentic the stories were. It showed the scene of the abortion happening by ultrasound at 13 weeks. It showed a couple other scenes of abortions at other phases of gestation. And I felt it was very, very accurate based on my encounters with women who have had abortions and them explaining what has happened to them. So a lot of women who have had abortions and who are seeing the show are saying it's giving them their voice back a little bit, that it's putting up there on the screen for everybody to see the reality of what women go through with an abortion procedure. And
that's why it received an R rating too, is because the abortion was so graphic, wanted to be depicted so lifelike. And that's why it received the R rating, so that's quite interesting. Canada has a federal election coming up this fall, October 21st. Perhaps now is when Christians' voices should be heard. Your thoughts?
Yeah, when we have major party leaders saying that the abortion debate is closed, number one, that's, very academically thin, in terms of understanding the true issue here, that we are in a scenario where there are no laws on abortion in Canada. And so, for example, hypothetically, and it's not hypothetical, when Justin Trudeau stands up and says, we are not going to reopen the abortion debate, effectively what he's saying is that he supports third trimester abortion. He supports a baby being dismembered in the womb at taxpayer expense for no medical reason at 37 weeks when, both of my babies I had at 36 weeks, where that baby is completely viable outside the womb, where we have a wait list for adoption of newborn babies extending 7, 8, 9 years in some provinces. So when Justin Trudeau says that he will not open the debate, effectively he is supporting and defending third trimester abortion at taxpayer expense. And that needs to be called out because that is very, very radical. And yet a lot of MPs don't actually know the status quo on abortion. I have sat down with members of parliament in their office and explain to them that abortion is legal in the third trimester. And I've had MPs come back and say, no, that's not true. And I'll say, well, hey, just get your assistant on it. And within 10 minutes, they come back and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that. And so there really is a lack of awareness issue. And I think going into the federal election is people just in love, we can do it with the spirit of love and humility, speaking the truth in a way that penetrates as we show honor in the conversation and just say, hey, did you know? Because when most Canadians find out that you can abort a baby right up until 9 months in Canada at taxpayer expense, they're horrified. The reality is, though, is most Canadians don't know that, which just one of the reasons we talk about it on our show. And thank you for giving me a few moments to go off here.
You know what's interesting as well, Faye, is the fact that federal Tory leader Andrew Scheer also mentioned that he's not going to reopen the abortion debate. But Maxime Bernier from the PPC, the People's Party of Canada, said he would be willing to reopen the debate. But then again, he's only getting maybe 2% of the popular vote right now, so not as much of an issue. Outside of the abortion debate, what are the other hot button issues do you think are heading into the federal election this fall?
Well, you know, I actually just interviewed the Honorable Rob Nicholson and asked him the exact same question, and I agree with his answer. He said integrity. He said, Canadians are looking for leaders that have courage. That's why everybody loves Jody Wilson-Raybould right now and Jean Philpott, is because, they've been willing to stand with courage, forthrightly and authentically and out of a place of integrity. And we're looking for leaders that will keep their promises, right? That when you say you're going to balance a budget within 4 years, then you better do it. And I would be in support of a law that would come forward. Maybe we'll call it the Integrity Act, that would say leaders are bound by law to keep their election promises unless they get 80% of the House of Commons agreeing that they can break a promise or something like that. It's not okay that we have leaders that are trying to pacify the masses in an election year with hollow promises with no intent of executing. And so, we need to call our leaders to the carpet on that type of behavior, right? I think the federal debt, the fact that we have driven up the debt at a historic level for a non-recession cycle in the last 3.5 to 4 years, that is very concerning. When the marginal tax rate in Ontario right now, for example, is 53%. And when you include everything, tax at the till, when you include income tax, carbon tax, everything tax, soda tax, that most people are spending more than half of the year working for the government, even if they don't work for the government. Where is this going? Are my children going to be paying 80% of their annual income in an 80% marginal tax rate? Because every time we drive up the debt and the deficit, basically what we're doing is we're heaping a tax burden on future generations. This has got to break some point. And so I think these are justice issues. The fact that we're paying $80 million a day to the federal debt, that's $80 million that isn't going to our vets, isn't going to our healthcare system, isn't going to things that really need focus and fiscal attention. And so, we need to be talking about the social issues, but we also need to realize that the debt is a justice issue as well, and it affects us all. And integrity. I'll end there again. Integrity.
And speaking of debt, the biggest debt of all was paid on the cross, the sacrifice of our sins on the cross. Let's talk about a spiritual change in Canada. Faye, what really needs to happen in our country?
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that it's always a both and, that we need to see revival. Revival is our survival. And as the hearts of people are changed, as they encounter heaven, they encounter Jesus, that will transform their hearts. But then transformed people need to rise up and transform a nation. What is it good for? If we are transformed and it stops there, but we don't begin to impact the world around us, fight for the broken, fight for the poor, I would say that that's not a real form of Christianity. Our faith isn't just for ourselves. Jesus, he's all about serving others, serving mankind. And so I think, if we're going to see a shift in our nation, we need to continue to pray for revival and for people's hearts to be transformed. But then we need to pray that those of us who have had transformed hearts begin to get our courage on and begin to get our sacrifice on and begin to get our boldness on and begin to get in the game. As David Main said to me before he passed on, he said, Faye, the nation goes to those who show up. And I believe that we need to, if we're going to see Canada transformed, obviously we need hearts transformed, but the transformed need to get up and go and be our prayers with skin on in the places that matter.
Now, you mentioned that you've met with parliamentarians. I met with a few myself when I used to work on the Hill for the Sun News Network. Now, you actually take some young people as well to meet some of the MPs and talk about some of their concerns. Can you give us a bit of an update on that? Does that still happen?
Yeah, well, I had a great problem about a year ago. All of my core leaders that would normally facilitate us taking these delegations to Parliament came to me and said, Faye, we believe that we're supposed to run for office. Every single one of them put their hat in the ring to run for office. And so my assistant director, who in the past has run these teams, is now the Conservative candidate in York Centre. And so we're actually rebuilding our leadership base team, right now to continue to take these delegations. But we are planning on bringing our next delegation to Parliament, our next youth delegation to Parliament in the spring of 2020 after the new Parliament is sworn in. That's a great problem when you got a new generation rising up to run for office. That's
Absolutely.
A beautiful moment.
Faye Grzeski, the host of the Faye television program, which airs now on Miracle Channel Wednesdays at 10:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.